the years leading up to the Second World War, the world's oceans became a theater of ambition, pride, and power. Every great nation sought to dominate the waves, Britain with its Royal Navy, America with its carriers and cruisers, and Japan with a vision born from centuries of isolation and honor. The Imperial Japanese Navy, rising rapidly through the early 20th century, was determined to surpass them all. From the ashes of World War I and the constraints of naval treaties, Japan dreamed of a weapon so formidable that no enemy fleet could challenge it, a ship so vast, so heavily armed, that it would redefine naval warfare forever. That ship was Yamato. Construction of the battleship Yamato began in 1937 at the Kure Naval Arsenal, under a shroud of absolute secrecy. Her very existence was hidden from the world. Only a few within the highest circles of the Imperial Navy knew what was taking shape behind locked gates and covered scaffolds. The project bore the code name Project Number 797. Every blueprint, every rivet, every ton of steel was a state secret. Workers were sworn to silence. Even within the dockyards, rumors spread, whispers of a vessel larger than any warship ever conceived. When Yamato was launched on December 16, 1941, just days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, she stood as a symbol of the Empire's might and destiny. Her displacement exceeded 70,000 tons fully loaded. Her main armament, 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a ship. Each shell weighed over 3,200 pounds, capable of pulverizing a battleship with a single strike. She was not merely a warship. She was a message to the United States, to Britain, and to history itself. Japan had built the ultimate weapon of sea power. But even as Yamato rose from her dry dock, the world was changing faster than steel could be forged. In the skies above the Pacific, new machines, aircraft carriers, bombers, and submarines were rewriting the rules of war. While Japan placed its faith in the battleship, America turned toward a quieter, deadlier weapon, the submarine. At the outbreak of war in 1941, the United States Navy possessed fewer than 60 frontline submarines in the Pacific. Many were outdated, slow, and plagued with mechanical problems. Their torpedoes, the Mark 14s, were notoriously unreliable. They ran too deep, failed to detonate, or exploded prematurely. Yet beneath the waves, a new breed of sailor was learning the art of invisible warfare. Submariners lived in darkness, cramped compartments, recycled air, and silence that stretched for weeks. They hunted by sound, by instinct, and by the faint echoes of a distant propeller. They were often called the silent service, men who fought their war unseen, uncelebrated, but vital to America's strategy. By 1943, these submarines began to choke Japan's lifelines. Convoys carrying fuel, food, and steel to the home islands vanished beneath the waves. Merchant fleets, tankers, and destroyers all fell victim to a relentless, unseen enemy. The Imperial Navy, once proud and unchallenged, began to feel the tightening grip of the deep. As the Pacific War raged across thousands of miles, Yamato remained mostly hidden, a secret weapon reserved for Japan's final victory. She rarely saw combat. Her presence alone was considered deterrence enough. But across the ocean, the United States Navy grew stronger. New carriers, Essex, Bunker Hill, Enterprise, roamed the seas. Submarines operated in coordinated wolf packs, striking convoys with ruthless precision. The balance of power was shifting. In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, Japan lost 4 of its fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Tsuraya, and Hiryu. It was a disaster from which the Imperial Navy would never truly recover. And yet, Yamato remained untouched, anchored in the inland sea, a floating fortress, waiting for the moment Japan would unleash her. In December 1943, she finally saw combat, engaging American aircraft in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But the skies belonged to the Americans now. The age of the battleship was fading, replaced by the thunder of engines above the clouds. By 1944, the American submarine fleet had become a precision weapon. From Pearl Harbor to Fremantle, they prowled the Pacific, guided by new radar, sonar, and code-breaking intelligence. The U.S. Navy's Ultra program, decoding Japanese communications, allowed submarines to strike with uncanny accuracy. One such submarine, the USS Archerfish, would soon enter history. Commissioned in September 1943, Archerfish was a Belau-class submarine, 311 feet long, armed with 10 torpedo tubes, and capable of diving to 400 feet. Under the command of Commander Joseph Enright, she patrolled the Western Pacific through late 1944, often shadowing Japanese movements without ever realizing she would one day encounter the largest warship ever built. In the months leading to 1945, Japan's empire was collapsing. The Philippines had fallen. The home islands were under constant bombardment. Desperation forced Japan to deploy Yamato on a mission no ship was meant to survive. In April 1945, as American forces prepared to invade Okinawa, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced extinction. Fuel reserves were nearly gone. Aircraft were scarce. But pride demanded a final gesture, a sacrifice for the emperor. Yamato was chosen for Operation Tengo. Her mission: sail south to Okinawa, beach herself on the island's coast, and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. It was, in truth, a suicide mission, one last symbol of defiance. As Yamato steamed from the inland sea on April 6, 1945, escorted by a handful of cruisers and destroyers, the world's largest battleship was heading toward her fate. Far to the east, in the deep blue of the Pacific, submarines of the U.S. Navy moved in quiet arcs, listening, hunting. Among them was the USS Archerfish, unaware that the encounter awaiting her would become one of the most extraordinary stories in naval history. April 6, 1945. The morning mist over the inland sea concealed a fleet that should no longer have existed. At Chore Naval Base, men lined the decks of the battleship Yamato for what they all understood might be their final journey. The war had turned irrevocably against Japan. Allied air raids had ravaged cities. The Imperial fleet was broken, scattered, or sunk. And yet, in a moment of tragic defiance, Yamato was ordered to sea. Operation Tengo, the final sortie of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had one objective: to defend Okinawa. But with barely enough fuel to reach the island and none to retain, this was not a mission of victory. It was an act of sacrifice. At 4 a.m., Yamato slipped her moorings, escorted by the light cruiser Yahaji and 8 destroyers. Over 3,000 men were aboard: sailors, gunners, engineers, each aware of their destiny. Captain Kosaku Ariga, Yamato's commanding officer, stood on the bridge, his face expressionless as the engines thundered below. He knew what awaited them. He had volunteered for this duty. Archival radio announcer, VO, recreated tone. Yamato departs the inland sea to protect Okinawa. The spirit of the samurai sails once more. But even as Japan's propaganda broadcast their defiance, American codebreakers at Pearl Harbor had already intercepted every transmission. Through decrypted messages and radar surveillance, Admiral Raymond Spruant's Fifth Fleet knew of Yamato's departure almost immediately. The most powerful battleship in the world was sailing into a trap. South of Kyushu, in the East China Sea, American submarines prowled the shipping lanes. Among them, the USS Archerfish, SS-311, under Commander Joseph Enright, moved silently beneath calm seas. Archerfish had been on patrol for 5 weeks. Her crew was exhausted, her supplies running low. They had seen little action, but the men remained vigilant, for in these waters, anything could happen. The submarine sonar operators listened through headsets, the soft hum of the sea masking faint echoes: merchant ships, destroyers, or perhaps nothing at all. That morning, Enright received a message from Pacific Fleet Headquarters. Enemy major warship sighted moving south. Maintain patrol. Report any contact. It was a standard order, yet destiny often hides in routine. Unbeknownst to Enright and his crew, the major warship was Yamato herself, and the convergence of these two vessels, one a steel giant, the other a silent hunter, would soon write a chapter for the ages. April 7, 1945, dawn. Yamato's massive propellers churned the gray waters of the East China Sea. Her lookouts scanned the horizon, but their eyes were drawn upward. Everyone knew the threat would come from the sky. American carrier planes ruled the Pacific. Captain Ariga, calm and stoic, gave his final orders. Anti-aircraft guns were manned, lifeboats prepared, and the ship's flag, the rising sun, was raised high. Below deck, engineers in oil-stained uniforms worked feverishly. The great turbines of Yamato pushed the ship to 22 knots, the fastest she could manage on her dwindling fuel. At the same moment, over 200 miles away, radar operators aboard the carrier USS Essex picked up the formation. The fleet that had once terrified the Pacific was now exposed. sailing in daylight, unescorted by air cover. The order went out. All available aircraft, launch immediately. Target, Yamato and escort group. The largest AC attack of the Pacific War was about to begin. Commander Enright aboard Archerfish had no knowledge of the impending air assault. His submarine continued its patrol northwest of Okinawa, cruising slowly on the safest under cover of darkness. At 8 p.m. on November 28, 1944, months earlier, Archerfish had encountered another massive Japanese vessel near Tokyo Bay. That ship, later identified as the aircraft carrier Shinano, had been sunk by Enright's torpedoes, a feat unmatched in submarine history. Now, fate seemed poised to test him again. Through the periscope, Enright's executive officer spotted faint silhouettes on the horizon, a formation of ships moving fast. They were too distant to identify, but their speed and coordination suggested warships. Battle group, Enright muttered, adjusting his periscope. Could be a decoy, or something big. The sonar operator reported multiple propeller signatures, large, rhythmic, powerful. One stood out, deeper, slower, heavier than the rest. Enright ordered Archerfish to dive to periscope depth and prepare for tracking. In the control room, red lights bathed the men's faces. The temperature rose. Every valve hissed softly. Every whisper seemed thunderous. If the ship they were tracking was indeed Yamato, no submarine on Earth had ever faced a target of such size, nor one so dangerous. By mid-morning on April 7, 1945, Yamato's fate was sealed. American Task Force 58, a vast armada of carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, had unleashed over 400 aircraft toward the Japanese fleet. Fighter bombers, torpedo planes, and dive bombers streaked across the sky. From Yamato's decks, the horizon burned. Black smoke columns rose as flak filled the air. The ship's 18.1-inch guns, designed to shatter steel at miles distance, now fired blindly into the heavens at aircraft that swarmed like hornets. Archival radio recreation, VO. Incoming waves, starboard. Prepared to repel air attack. Bombs struck Yahaji, tearing her midsection apart. Destroyers exploded in sheets of flame. Then, Yamato herself was hit. One bomb penetrated her forward deck, exploding deep inside. Moments later, torpedoes slammed into her port side. The ship listed violently. Men were thrown into the sea. Still, Captain Arriga refused to abandon ship. He ordered counterflooding to balance the hull, even as secondary fires raged. For nearly 2 hours, the world's largest warship endured an unending storm of metal and fire. At 2:20 p.m., with her magazines ignited, Yamato's hull erupted in a catastrophic explosion. The shockwave flattened clouds for miles. A pillar of smoke rose 6 kilometers into the sky. When it cleared, the ocean was empty, save for oil, wreckage, and scattered survivors. Out of a crew of 3,332 men, only 276 were rescued. The pride of the Imperial Navy was gone. Ironically, while American aircraft claimed Yamato's destruction, it was the submarine force that had already proven, months earlier, that no warship, no matter how massive, was safe beneath the sea. On November 29, 1944, USS Archerfish, operating near Japan's southern coast, intercepted a massive ship escorted by destroyers. Commander Enright tracked her for hours, maneuvering through shallow waters and patrol routes. At 3:15 a.m., he fired 6 torpedoes. 4 struck home. The explosion was immense. Within hours, the unidentified vessel rolled and vanished beneath the waves. It was only days later that Enright learned what he had sunk. Shinano, the world's largest aircraft carrier, sister ship to Yamato. Built on the same hull, armored with the same steel, Shinano had been Japan's final hope to turn the tide. Enright's single submarine had erased it from existence. With Yamato's destruction in April 1945 and Shinano's loss months earlier, the age of the super battleship came to a definitive end. The ocean, once ruled by giants of steel, now belonged to submarines and aircraft. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the remains of Yamato rested 1,200 feet below the East China Sea. Her guns silent, her flag lost, her name remembered only in history and legend. For the men of Archerfish, the war also ended quietly. Commander Enright received the Navy Cross for his role in sinking Shinano. His crew returned home, unaware that their patrol would be studied for generations as a turning point in undersea warfare. The story of Yamato and Archerfish is more than a tale of steel and torpedoes. It is a story of two worlds colliding, one built on the old faith in size and armor, the other on stealth and precision. From the skies above Okinawa to the depths of Japan's coast, history had rendered its verdict. Power was no longer measured in tons of steel, but in the unseen reach of those who could strike without being seen. And so, the largest warship ever built, and the smallest crew to challenge her kind, became bound together forever in the chronicles of war. In silence, in courage, in the endless, echoing sea. When the sea finally calmed on April 8, 1945, the East China Sea was silent once more. Oil slicks drifted across the surface, reflecting the pale morning light. Wreckage, wooden planks, twisted steel, lifeboat fragments, floated in eerie stillness. Among them were the survivors of Yamato. Rescue destroyers, retreating toward Sasebo, pulled men from the water, dazed, burned, and clinging to debris. Only 276 would be saved from a crew of more than 3,300. The Imperial Japanese Navy's proudest symbol had vanished beneath the waves. Her loss marked the death of not only a ship, but of an entire philosophy of warfare. For centuries, nations had measured power by the size of their ships, the thickness of their armor, and the number of their guns. Now, a new age had dawned, one defined by air and by the silent weapon beneath the sea. The world had changed forever. In the aftermath of Yamato's destruction, the Allied command began a detailed analysis of Japan's naval losses. Intelligence officers, engineers, and strategists examined every intercepted message, every reconnaissance photograph. The conclusion was inescapable. Aircraft and submarines, not battleships, had determined the outcome of the Pacific War. Submarines, comprising less than 2% of the U.S. Navy, had sunk over 55% of Japan's merchant shipping. They had severed supply lines, starved the empire of oil, and crippled its ability to sustain war. The sinking of Shinano by the USS Archerfish was studied with particular attention. It had proven that even the largest warship could not escape a determined submarine. Speed, armor, and size, once the hallmarks of power, had become liabilities in the era of stealth. From the wreck of Yamato, the lessons of naval warfare were rewritten. By July 1945, Japan's cities lay in ruins. Tokyo burned under relentless bombing raids. Hiroshima and Nagasaki awaited their fates. The once proud Imperial fleet was reduced to scattered hulks rusting in their harbors. The few surviving ships, cruisers, destroyers, and training vessels were immobilized for lack of fuel. When Japan formally surrendered on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, former Navy minister, stood among the defeated delegation. He had once overseen Yamato's construction, believing it would secure Japan's dominance for generations. Now, as he looked across the deck of an American battleship, he saw the irony of history written before him. The great Yamato lay beneath the sea, unseen but not forgotten, her name echoing the spirit of a nation, her fall symbolizing the twilight of the battleship age. In the years following World War II, the submarine evolved from a tactical weapon into a strategic force. The lessons of Archerfish, Tang, Wahoo, and other wartime submarines shaped the designs of the Cold War. The United States Navy introduced new classes, Gato, Bulau, and later Tang, refined with superior sonar, endurance, and propulsion. But the greatest transformation came with nuclear power. In 1954, the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine, went to sea. She could travel faster submerged than on the surface, and remain underwater for months. The ocean had become her domain, limitless and invisible. The philosophy that had doomed Yamato, reliance on armor and size, was now replaced by a new doctrine: stealth, endurance, and the power of the unseen. For decades after the war, Yamato's location remained a mystery. Veterans spoke of her sinking, but the exact site was lost to the depths. In 1985, 40 years after the end of World War II, a Japanese research team led by Dr. Kentaro Shimazaki began an expedition using sonar and submersible technology. After weeks of searching, they detected a massive object lying upright on the seabed, 1,200 feet below the surface, broken in two, her bow and stern separated by nearly half a mile. Cameras sent down into the darkness revealed a haunting sight. A steel colossus draped in coral and silt, her turrets still in place, her deck silent. Yamato had become a tomb, The discovery rekindled a national reflection in Japan, not of glory, but of remembrance. What had once symbolized strength was now a monument to sacrifice and the futility of war. The USS Archerfish completed her final war patrol in 1945 and returned home to a hero's welcome. Commander Joseph Enright received the Navy Cross, and his crew was commended for one of the most significant submarine victories in naval history, the sinking of Shinano. After the war, Archerfish continued to serve as a training vessel before being decommissioned in 1968. She was later used as a target in naval exercises and sunk off the coast of California, ending her story beneath the waves she once dominated. For Enright, the war's memory never faded. He often spoke not of victory, but of the solemn duty that defined those years, of men on both sides, bound by courage and circumstance. In interviews before his death in 2000, he described his feelings on learning what ship he had sunk. "We had done our job, but when I learned it was Shinano, I felt a chill. She was magnificent, and it was a tragedy that such skill and labor ended that way." His words echoed the sentiment of an entire generation: respect for the enemy, and sorrow for the waste of war. By the late 20th century, the principles of naval warfare had balanced once more. Aircraft carriers replaced battleships as the capital ships of modern fleets. Submarines evolved into silent guardians of nuclear deterrence, capable of launching missiles across continents. Yet, beneath all technological advancement, the same ocean remained, vast, unchanging, indifferent. In every navy, from America to Japan, cadets studied the lessons of Yamato and Archerfish. They learned that courage alone could not defeat innovation, and that the mightiest vessel is vulnerable to the smallest unseen threat. Naval historians would come to describe the sinking of Yamato as the final punctuation of an era, the end of the battleship, and the rise of a new order born in silence. Today, the story of Yamato endures as both tragedy and testament. Her name graces museums, films, and memorials across Japan, a reminder of a nation's ambition and the cost of its realization. Her wreck, now protected as a war grave, rests quietly in darkness, a reminder of the price of pride. The USS Archerfish, though gone, remains immortal in naval records and the minds of those who understand what she achieved. Her patrols, her crew, and her captain demonstrated that victory in war is not merely a matter of size or power, but of resolve, skill, and timing. Two vessels, one the largest warship ever built, the other a submarine of ordinary design, met across time and consequence. Together, they defined the boundaries of an age and the beginning of another. In the endless movement of the ocean, all things are eventually forgotten, but never erased. Beneath miles of dark water, Yamato lies where she fell, her flag long faded, her crew forever silent. Nearby, the currents flow as they did in 1945, calm, eternal, and indifferent. The sea remembers no sides, no nations, no victories. It remembers only the echo of steel, the final heartbeat of engines, and the silence that follows. The story of Yamato and Archerfish endures, not as legend, but as lesson, that in the vastness of war, no ship, no empire, and no dream is unsinkable. And in that truth lies the enduring legacy of the men who sailed into history and never returned. The sinking of Yamato in April 1945 was not merely the destruction of a ship. It marked the death of an idea, the belief that naval dominance was measured in size, armor, and artillery. In her final moments, as the waves of the East China Sea swallowed her steel hull, the world witnessed a transformation in warfare, a shift from the visible giants above to the silent hunters below. The Pacific War ended with lessons written in oil, salt water, and blood. From Midway to Leyte Gulf, Japan's once invincible fleet had been erased by air power and submarines. Battleships, once kings of the ocean, became relics overnight. In Washington, London, and Moscow, naval strategists pored over wartime data. Every chart, every wreck, every lost convoy told the same truth. The surface of the ocean was no longer safe. Submarines, once supporting tools, had become the most decisive naval weapon of the 20th century. Their stealth, reach, and independence allowed even a single vessel to cripple the logistics of an empire. Yamato's end symbolized more than Japan's defeat. It was the beginning of a technological revolution beneath the waves. In the ashes of World War II, two nations rose from the wreckage with unmatched industrial and scientific might: the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had witnessed how the silent war beneath the oceans had changed history. The U.S. Navy had perfected submarine warfare in the Pacific, while the Soviets, inspired and alarmed, began to rebuild their fleet from scratch, drawing upon captured German U-boats and engineers. By 1947, the global order had hardened into the Cold War. Each superpower understood that future wars would not begin with battleships on the horizon, but with invisible machines gliding beneath the sea. The oceans, once highways of commerce, were now potential front lines of annihilation. On January 21, 1954, a new kind of vessel slid down the ways at Groton, Connecticut. Her name was USS Nautilus, SSN 571, and she would change naval history forever. Powered by a nuclear reactor, Nautilus could stay submerged for months, traveling at unprecedented speeds without surfacing for air. She did not need diesel fuel. She did not need oxygen. Her only limitation was the endurance of her crew. For the first time, a submarine was truly invisible, a ghost of steel that could circle the globe beneath the sea. With nuclear propulsion, the ocean's depths became a new dimension of strategy. Archival quote, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1955. This vessel represents not only scientific triumph, but the courage of men who venture into the unknown, beneath the seas, and into the future. The world watched in awe, and in faith. The United States had created not just a ship, but a new kind of weapon, one that could strike anywhere, unseen, unstoppable. Within a decade, the underwater race became a worldwide obsession. In 1960, Britain launched the HMS Dreadnought, its first nuclear-powered submarine, carrying on a name that once defined surface warfare, now reborn beneath the waves. France soon followed with a redoutable, designed to patrol silently with nuclear missiles. Even China, a rising power, began developing its own nuclear-powered boats, launching the Type 091 Han class by the early 1970s. Each navy carried forward the same lesson born from the Pacific. To survive, one must remain unseen. Yamato had been magnificent, but she was visible, too visible. In the modern ocean, visibility meant vulnerability. As nuclear technology advanced, a chilling new concept emerged: second strike capability. If one nation launched a nuclear attack, the other could respond, even if its cities were destroyed. The key to this terrifying balance was the ballistic missile submarine, or SSBN. The United States deployed the George Washington class in 1960, each carrying Polaris missiles. They were soon followed by the Lafayette and Ohio classes, armed with Poseidon and Trident warheads. The Soviet Union answered with its own behemoths, the Hotel, Yankee, and eventually, the colossal Typhoon class. Beneath the waves, the two superpowers played a deadly game of hide and seek, their submarines prowling the Arctic and the Pacific, always ready, yet never seen. These vessels were the ultimate paradox, machines built for war, whose very existence prevented it. They became the invisible guardians of peace through the threat of total destruction. As technology grew, so did the risks. The 1960s and 1970s saw a series of tragedies and near confrontations that reminded the world of the sea's unforgiving nature. April 10, 1963, the USS Thresher, America's most advanced submarine, was lost during deep-diving trials. All 129 aboard perished. 5 years later, in 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 vanished in the Pacific under mysterious circumstances, possibly with nuclear missiles on board. That same year, the USS Scorpion, SSN 589, failed to return from patrol. Her wreck was found months later, deep in the Atlantic. Each incident was cloaked in secrecy, suspicion, and silence. Beneath the calm of diplomacy, a hidden war continued: espionage, sonar tracking, cable tapping, and shadow pursuits through the ocean depths. At any moment, one misinterpreted sonar contact could have triggered the end of civilization. By the 1980s, the ocean floor had become as militarized as the skies. Yet through it all, the spirit of innovation born from necessity continued to evolve. Advanced sonar arrays, undersea communication systems, and computer-guided torpedoes replaced crude periscopes and manual targeting. Submariners became the elite, living weeks in silence, trusting their training, their machinery, and each other. From the lessons of Yamato to the depths of the Cold War, one truth endured: technology could only change warfare, not the courage or the fragility of those who fought it. The submarine had become not just a weapon of war, but a vessel of deterrence, research, and discovery. The ocean is eternal, and so are those who dare to command it. The next era would not be defined by technology alone, but by the men and women who lived within steel walls under crushing pressure. Their stories of isolation, endurance, and sacrifice would reveal the human heart behind the machine. From the bridge of the Yamato to the control room of a nuclear submarine, the sea remained the same, vast, indifferent, and absolute. For all the power of steel and science that defines modern submarines, it is the human element that gives them life. Each submarine is more than machinery. It is a microcosm of discipline, endurance, and trust, sealed within pressure hulls and surrounded by the infinite silence of the sea. From the diesel boats of World War II to the nuclear leviathans of the Cold War, submariners have lived in a world few ever see. Aboard these vessels, day and night lose their meaning. There is no horizon, only the hum of the reactor, the rhythm of pumps, and the pulse of the human heart. Theirs is a world measured not in miles, but in depth, endurance, and faith in one another. During the Second World War, life aboard an American Gato-class submarine was defined by cramped quarters, diesel fumes, and constant tension. Men slept beside torpedoes, ate canned rations, and lived in shifts, never far from danger. A single mistake, a wrong depth setting, a faulty valve, could mean death for all aboard. And yet, they volunteered. Every submarine crew, from every navy, shares a quiet understanding. The ocean is always stronger. Survival depends not on fearlessness, but on discipline, and the unspoken bond between shipmates. To master life beneath the sea requires more than courage. It requires conditioning of both body and mind. In the United States Navy's submarine school at Groton, Connecticut, recruits endure weeks of intense training. They learn damage control, navigation, sonar interpretation, and survival in confined spaces. They are taught to think calmly as alarms sound, lights flicker, and compartments flood during simulation drills. The Soviet Navy, in its own rigorous tradition, forged its submariners through equally harsh regimens. Training bases in Murmansk and Vladivostok prepared young sailors to face the polar seas, where temperatures dropped below freezing, and isolation could last for months. Across the world, the lesson was the same. Underwater, there is no margin for error. Crew cohesion is not optional, it is survival itself. Every member of a submarine's complement must know every emergency procedure, every valve, every hatch. When a crisis strikes, there is no time to consult a manual, only instinct and teamwork. During simulated emergencies, recruits learn to fight fires, seal leaks, and escape flooded compartments, all in total darkness, with only the hiss of air and the weight of pressure surrounding them. By the time they earn their dolphins, the insignia of a qualified submariner, they are not merely sailors. They are custodians of trust, trained to operate at the edge of human endurance. Every submarine is an island of command, where one man's judgment can determine the fate of dozens. The burden of leadership beneath the sea is unique. There are no reinforcements, no escape, and no second chances. In the Second World War, commanders such as Dudley Mush Martin, Richard O'Kane, and Sam Dealey turned American submarines into weapons of precision and audacity. Operating thousands of miles from base, they made instantaneous decisions, when to dive, when to fire, when to run. Their victories crippled Japanese shipping, hastening the end of the war. But their heroism carried a cost. Dozens of U.S. and Allied submarines never returned, lost with all hands, their resting places marked only by depth and silence. The Soviets, too, had their heroes, men like Captain Vasily Arkhipov, whose calm refusal to authorize a nuclear torpedo launch during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 may have prevented World War III. Leadership beneath the waves is not measured by aggression, but by restraint. A submarine commander must trust his crew, his machines, and his judgment, even when every sound in the ocean might be an enemy. Every order carries absolute weight, and every silence carries meaning. Life beneath the ocean imposes pressures far beyond the physical. Submariners live in confinement, steel corridors, artificial light, recycled air. For weeks, even months, they see no sunlight. Their world is metal, routine, and discipline. The human mind adapts, but not easily. Fatigue becomes constant. Dreams grow vivid. Every sound, a wrench dropped, a sonar ping, a distant thud, carries potential meaning. Naval psychologists have long studied submarine stress. The effect of time distortion, sensory deprivation, and interpersonal strain in confined crews. To combat it, submarines develop rituals, meal schedules, movies, shared jokes, even celebrations of fake holidays. Routine became the anchor of sanity. In U.S. and British submarines, the mid-patrol meal, often steak and ice cream, was a moment of shared relief. For Soviet sailors, the simple sound of a recorded song or the voice of Radio Moscow could restore morale after weeks of silence. Despite the isolation, a strange serenity often takes hold. Many submariners speak of the quiet as peaceful, even sacred. In that deep blue stillness, they become attuned to the smallest vibrations, to the living pulse of the ocean itself. When they return to land, many describe the surface world as loud and overwhelming. The sea, they say, is the only place where thought becomes pure. For decades, the submarine service was a male domain, shaped by tradition and the technical challenges of confined living. But the turn of the 21st century brought transformation. In 2010, the United States Navy began integrating women into submarine crews. Britain followed in 2011, and other nations soon after. Today, women serve as officers, engineers, and commanders aboard nuclear submarines across the globe. Their presence has not only reshaped the culture of submarine warfare, but expanded its sense of purpose and inclusivity. The ocean makes no distinction between gender. It demands only competence, courage, and composure. And those who serve beneath it, regardless of who they are, share the same unbreakable bond, the bond of those who trust their lives to one another in darkness. Every nation that has sent men and women beneath the sea carries a debt to those who never returned. From the wrecks of U.S. submarines in the Pacific to the resting places of Soviet boats in the Arctic, the seabed is a vast, silent cemetery, where more than 50,000 submariners from all navies lie entombed. In Groton, Connecticut, the U.S. Submarine Force Museum preserves their memory. In St. Petersburg, the Central Naval Museum honors Soviet sailors lost in the Cold War. And in Kyoto, Japan, the Yamato Museum stands as a reminder that the pursuit of power, when divorced from wisdom, can lead to ruin. Beneath every technological triumph, there's a human story. A story of endurance, sacrifice, and the will to master fate. The submarine, perhaps more than any other vessel, is a mirror of the human spirit, capable of immense destruction, yet reliant entirely on discipline, cooperation, and courage. As the Cold War faded, the silent war beneath the sea evolved once more. Submarines that once carried weapons of mass destruction began to carry tools of exploration and science. From the abyssal plains of the Pacific to the frozen reaches of the Arctic, these same technologies opened doors to knowledge, revealing Earth's deepest secrets. In the next chapter, the submarine leaves the shadow of war and enters a new age of research, discovery, and global cooperation beneath the waves. By the final decade of the 20th century, the submarine had changed once again. Its mission, once defined by warfare and deterrence, began to embrace science, exploration, and preservation. The Cold War was over. The superpowers that once prowled the oceans in silence now turned their attention to peace, commerce, and understanding. Yet the legacy of their technological race remained. Vast fleets of advanced vessels, the most complex machines humanity had ever created. No longer bound by the threat of nuclear war, some of these submarines were transformed into tools for discovery. The very systems that once carried missiles now carried cameras, sensors, and robotic explorers. For the first time, the deep ocean, long the final frontier on Earth, was within humanity's reach. The submarine story is one of contradiction. Born from the necessities of war, it became an instrument of peace. Its technology, perfected for secrecy, became vital for knowledge. Throughout the late 20th century, the same nations that once armed the depths with nuclear weapons began to send submarines to map the ocean floor, study marine life, and recover lost relics from history. The United States Navy, for instance, supported missions with civilian oceanographers, a partnership between science and the military that blurred traditional boundaries. The legendary oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, who discovered the wreck of the Titanic in 1985, was guided by technology first developed for Cold War surveillance submarines. The same sonar arrays designed to detect enemy vessels now revealed coral reefs, underwater volcanoes, and the movements of giant squid. The submarine, once a shadow of destruction, became a vessel of illumination. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, fleets of nuclear submarines across the world faced uncertain futures. Some were dismantled, their reactors decommissioned. Others were refitted for new missions, missions of discovery. In Russia, the once secret bases of the Northern Fleet began hosting joint ventures with Western scientists. In the United States, submarines like the NR-1, a nuclear-powered research vessel, explored the depths for geological and biological secrets. France, Britain, and Japan each followed, launching scientific submersibles modeled on military precision. From the shadows of Yamato's fall to the sonar echoes of the Cold War, humanity's relationship with the sea had matured. The same depths that had once been battlefields were now frontiers of cooperation. In 2000, less than 10% of the world's ocean floor had been accurately mapped. By 2020, thanks to submarine and autonomous drone technology, that figure more than doubled. Deep-sea vehicles such as Japan's Shinkai 6500, the American Alvin, and Russia's May submersibles reached depths once thought impossible. They filmed hydrothermal vents, underwater geysers that spewed life-rich minerals from the Earth's crust. They found creatures that defied biology, thriving without sunlight. They discovered wrecks, time capsules of human history, preserved for decades beneath layers of silt. Each expedition carried echoes of the submarine's martial past, the same engineering precision, the same calculated risk, and the same reverence for the sea's unpredictable power. But now, the goal was understanding, not dominance. In 2019, the Five Deeps expedition completed humanity's first full descent into the deepest points of every ocean. The Mariana Trench, once symbol of mystery and fear, became a place of scientific triumph. From surface war to silent peace, the submarine had found a higher calling. As the 21st century unfolded, the oceans became a stage for collaboration rather than confrontation. International research teams, often composed of former rivals, worked side by side to study climate change, tectonic activity, and marine ecosystems. Joint missions between the United States, Japan, Russia, and European nations used advanced submersibles and unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, to monitor rising sea levels, melting polar ice, and pollution. The same oceans that once divided humanity now connected it through shared purpose. The Cold War's secrecy gave way to transparency. Sonar readings published openly, data shared across scientific institutions. Even the navies of the world began to participate in environmental monitoring, acknowledging that the planet's health depended on knowledge, not conflict. From the Arctic to the Indian Ocean, submarines were no longer hunters, they were guardians. And yet, beneath this progress, the shadows of old rivalries remain. Submarine fleets still patrol the oceans, silent, unseen, but ever-present. The nuclear deterrent has not vanished. It has simply become quieter, more discreet, more refined. China's Jin-class submarines, America's Columbia-class, Russia's Bory, and Britain's Vanguard continue to maintain the delicate balance of global stability. Each carries the same burden that began decades earlier, to exist not for war, but to prevent it. The paradox endures. The ocean remains both a sanctuary and a battlefield, a reminder that peace, like the sea itself, is never still. In the 21st century, the line between military and civilian submarine technology has blurred entirely. Autonomous drones now map the ocean floor, detect pollutants, and track migrations. Hybrid submersibles, built by private companies, explore wrecks once thought unreachable. The submarine's silent evolution continues, but its purpose has shifted irrevocably. From Yamato's fall to the modern day, the story has come full circle. What was once a weapon of conquest has become a vessel of curiosity. What once symbolized human hubris now represents human perseverance. In every sense, the submarine is an extension of humanity's oldest dream: to explore, to endure, and to understand the world beneath the surface. The sea remembers everything. Every ship that sailed, every battle fought, every secret lost to its depths remains preserved in its silence. In the next chapter, we journey into the ocean's memory, to the wrecks, relics, and resting places that tell the story of human triumph and tragedy beneath the waves. For every submarine that dives, every sonar pulse that echoes through the deep, the sea whispers back, reminding us that power fades, but legacy endures. Far below the restless surface of the sea lies a world untouched by time. There, Silence reigns, heavy, absolute, broken only by the slow rhythm of currents moving through the skeletons of ships long forgotten. The ocean remembers everything. Every ship that sailed, every life lost, every secret buried. From the mighty Yamato to humble merchant vessels, from ocean liners to submarines, each wreck is a monument, a memory, and a message to those who come after. In the East China Sea, nearly 1,000 feet below the surface, rests the Yamato, once the largest and most powerful battleship ever built. Her story began as a symbol of imperial might. It ended in a fiery storm of American torpedoes and bombs in April 1945. When she went down, more than 3,000 sailors perished with her, a loss so immense it marked the twilight of the battleship age. For decades, her resting place was unknown, whispered of by survivors, but unconfirmed. Then, in the 1980s, a Japanese research team using sonar and remotely operated vehicles found her shattered hull. It was broken clean in two, her bow and stern separated by hundreds of feet, a silent testament to the force that destroyed her. When cameras first descended upon her, they captured an image unlike any other. The great chrysanthemum crest, once polished gold, now covered in marine growth. It was not just a ship, it was a nation's memory, lying quietly in eternal peace. Every dive to the Yamato's grave is conducted with solemnity. Japanese naval vessels lower their flags, and divers offer prayers. For them, it is not an archaeological site, it is a shrine. Far from the Pacific, in the cold North Atlantic, another monument lies 2 miles beneath the surface, the Titanic. Though her story was not one of war, her tragedy was no less profound. Discovered in 1985 by Dr. Robert Ballard and his team, the wreck rests in haunting stillness. The bow, majestic even in ruin, lies upright. The stern, torn apart by the force of the sinking, lies scattered across a debris field. The Titanic's discovery changed how humanity saw the deep. For the first time, people could witness not only the grandeur of her design but the fragility of human ambition. She became both a cautionary tale and a cathedral of memory. Each artifact retrieved, a shoe, a clock, a porcelain cup, told a story of a life once lived, a moment once real. In her decay, the Titanic still teaches humility. In the North Atlantic, another giant sleeps, the German battleship Bismarck, whose career lasted only 9 days before she was hunted and sunk by the Royal Navy in 1941. For decades, her fate was wrapped in mystery and myth. Was she scuttled by her own crew, or finished by British fire? In 1989, oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, located her resting place nearly 3 miles deep. Her hull, remarkably intact, bore the scars of a desperate battle, shell holes, twisted guns, a gaping wound from the torpedo that doomed her. When the cameras explored her decks, they revealed a strange serenity. A great machine, now still, reclaimed by the sea. British and German veterans, once enemies, watched the footage together. Many wept. They did not see a weapon of war. They saw young men, lost to the same indifferent ocean. In the calm waters of Pearl Harbor lies one of America's most sacred sites, the USS Arizona. On the morning of December 7, 1941, a single bomb ignited her forward magazine, killing over 1,100 sailors instantly. Her wreck remains where she fell, half above water, half below, a bridge between worlds. From her rusting hull, droplets of oil still rise to the surface, shimmering like black tears. They call it the tears of the Arizona. A reminder that history breathes beneath those waters still. Each year, survivors and families return to honor the men entombed within her steel walls. Their reflections merge with the sea. And with time, not every wreck is known. Not every sailor's story is told. Beneath the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian Oceans lie countless submarines and ships, victims of storms, mines, and silent warfare. Each one represents a crew that never returned home. There is the USS Thresher, lost in 1963 with all 129 aboard, a tragedy that reshaped submarine safety forever. The Kursk, a Russian submarine lost in 2000, whose recovery brought nations together in shared grief. These are not just wrecks, they are memorials suspended in darkness. Time does not erase their stories, it only softens the edges of pain. When explorers descend to these sites, they do so not as conquerors but as witnesses. Each camera movement, each sonar sweep, is conducted with reverence. For in the deep, All flags fade. Nationality, ideology, and pride dissolve in the same cold silence. What remains is humanity, fragile, fallible, enduring. The ocean is the great equalizer. It holds the triumphs and tragedies of every nation alike, side by side, in its infinite expanse. In recent years, new international efforts have emerged to protect underwater war graves. The United Nations Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage recognizes shipwrecks as sacred sites, not resources to be exploited, but memories to be preserved. Nations have pledged to protect these underwater resting places from salvage, looting, or disturbance. They belong not to history books, but to humanity. Through documentaries, museum exhibits, and virtual dives, the stories of these vessels are shared with new generations. Technology has given us a window into their world, but it is respect that gives it meaning. Every dive, every expedition, begins the same way, with silence. A slow descent, lights cutting through eternal night, until a shape emerges from the void. A gun turret, a porthole, a nameplate. And in that moment, explorers understand what the ocean has always known. That memory is not bound by land or language. From Yamato's shattered hull to the rusting decks of the Arizona. From the Titanic's ghostly ballroom to the Bismarck's twisted guns, the sea holds their stories in perfect stillness. Time cannot claim them, because beneath the waves, history breathes forever. But memory alone does not tell the whole tale. Beyond remembrance lies legacy, the impact these ships, these stories, and these sailors left upon the generations that followed. In the next chapter, we explore how the lessons of the deep, courage, sacrifice, innovation, and humility continue to shape the modern world above the surface. Because the ocean does not just remember, it teaches. There are places in this world where silence speaks louder than sound, where the ocean holds its breath, and history listens. Down there, beyond the reach of sunlight, lie the remains of humanity's greatest ambitions and deepest regrets. Steel hulls once filled with life now rest in stillness, their echoes carried only by the current. But within that silence lies a lesson, not of defeat, nor of victory, but of endurance, of humility, of the fragile balance between power and peace. The ocean does not forget, it forgives in its own way. And through that forgiveness, it teaches. Each ship that lies upon the ocean floor once carried souls, young, determined, uncertain, but unafraid. Sailors who faced storms, fire, and the endless horizon. Men and women who served not knowing what awaited them beyond the waves. Their courage was not found in the glory of battle, but in the quiet moments before it, when fear is strongest, and yet duty prevails. When the Yamato's crew stood on deck as American planes darkened the sky, they knew what awaited them. They fired not out of hope for survival, but out of devotion, to their comrades, to their ship, to the idea of honor. And when the crew of the USS Archerfish stalked her in the blackness of the Pacific, their courage was of a different kind. The courage of patience, precision, and restraint. Both sides, separated by flags and languages, were united by the same truth. The ocean demanded respect, and it spared no one who forgot it. The sea has a way of humbling even the mightiest creations of man. The Yamato, a floating fortress, built with the pride of an empire, lies in fragments beneath the waves. The Titanic, a triumph of engineering, rests broken in the cold dark. Each wreck reminds us that no matter how powerful, how advanced, or how certain we are, nature remains greater still. The ocean is not cruel. It is simply eternal. And in its eternity, human ambition becomes small, but not meaningless. For it is through that fragility that we discover strength, the kind that endures when machines cannot. Behind every ship, every invention, every war, there are faces. They smile in photographs, write letters home, dream of the future. Then one day, the sea claims them. Progress often carries a price. It is paid in lives, in mistakes, in lessons written not in ink but in salt and steel. The men of the Thresher, the crew of the Kursk, the sailors lost in the Pacific. Each tragedy brought change. Each sorrow shaped the generations that followed. From those losses came safer ships, clearer protocols, deeper respect. Their sacrifice was not in vain, for the ocean does not allow waste. It transforms pain into wisdom. When divers and explorers descend to these wrecks, they no longer see enemies. They see human stories, intertwined, inseparable, eternal. A rusted insignia, a half-buried shoe, a faded nameplate. They bridge centuries and borders. Underwater, the distinctions of war dissolve. American, Japanese, German, British. They rest together in the same quiet dark. The sea knows no flags. It holds no grudges. Its depths unite where the surface once divided. And perhaps that is the ocean's greatest lesson. That peace begins where pride ends. On land, memorials rise in stone and bronze. But beneath the waves, remembrance takes gentler forms. Scientists map the resting places with care. Historians preserve their stories. Families scatter flowers on the tide, watching petals drift over unseen graves. Each gesture, each remembrance, keeps the silence alive, not as emptiness, but as meaning. There are men who have spent their lives searching for the wrecks of ships lost decades before, not to claim them, but to speak for them, to say, in their own way, you are not forgotten. War teaches through devastation. The sea teaches through reflection. Together, they shape the human spirit, reminding us that strength is not in domination, but in endurance. The Yamato teaches humility. The Archerfish teaches precision. The Titanic teaches empathy. The Bismarck teaches reconciliation. And the ocean, the oldest teacher of all, reminds us that everything returns to silence. We build, we fight, we fall. But the lessons remain, carried in the current, passed from one generation to the next. There is something sacred in the silence of the deep. It is not emptiness, it is memory made pure. Every diver who descends into that world feels it. The pressure not only of water, but of history. No words, no gestures can capture it fully. Only the heart can understand what it means to stand, or rather, to float, before the final truth of humanity. That old things fade, but meaning endures. The silence beneath the sea is not a void. It is a voice. Soft, eternal, patient, reminding us that peace is not the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding. Perhaps that is why humanity has always been drawn to the ocean. Its tides mirror our pulse. Its depths reflect our souls. We are, after all, made of the same salt and water. From the first sailors who braved the horizon to the astronauts who look back upon the blue planet from space, we are bound by that same longing to explore, to endure, to connect. The submarine story, from weapon to witness, mirrors our own evolution. We began in conquest. We matured in reflection. And now we seek understanding. The ocean's legacy is not destruction. It is transformation. The past lies quiet beneath the sea, but the future still stays within it. In the next chapter, we look forward to the new age of exploration, where technology and compassion guide humanity into the final frontier on Earth. For the ocean's lessons are not just of remembrance, but of renewal. It whispers not only of what was lost, but of what can still be found. For centuries, humanity looked up to the stars to dream of the future. But now, we are learning to look down, into the deep. Beneath the waves lies a world still unexplored, still mysterious, still waiting. A place as vast as space, yet closer than the moon. A place that whispers with life, movement, and memory. The next great frontier on Earth. As the 21st century unfolds, our gaze turns toward the depths not as a battlefield, nor a grave, but as a promise. A realm where discovery may define the next age of human progress. The submarine, once a weapon of war, is reborn as a vessel of hope. There was a time when maps bore blank spaces, regions marked only with the words terra incognita, the unknown land. Today, those blank spaces have moved beneath the ocean's surface. More than 80% of the world's seafloor remains uncharted, a landscape more alien than Mars. In its mountains, valleys, and trenches lies not only history, but the key to our future. And so begins a new kind of exploration, not with conquest, but with curiosity, not in the name of empire, but in the pursuit of knowledge. Submarines, autonomous drones, and deep-diving habitats now form the spearhead of this new age. An age of discovery as daring as the space race, but hidden from the sunlight. Modern explorers do not ride wooden ships or canvas sails. They command machines that glide through pressure and darkness as naturally as fish. The newest generation of submersibles, sleek, quiet, and capable of reaching depths once thought impossible, have transformed the way we see the ocean. Japan's Shinkai 6500, America's DSV limiting factor, and private innovations like OceanGate's Titan and deep flight crafts represent a leap in design philosophy. Where once the goal was survival, now the goal is endurance, to live beneath the sea, not merely visit it. They carry robotic arms that can collect fragile coral samples without breaking them, cameras that see in pitch blackness, and sensors that read the chemical signatures of life itself. Each dive expands not only our knowledge of the sea, but our understanding of what humanity can become when curiosity outweighs fear. In the coming decades, humanity may build its first permanent homes beneath the ocean. The idea once belonged to science fiction. Domed cities on the seafloor, glowing corridors lined with transparent glass, gardens growing in recycled air. But engineers are already designing prototypes. In Japan, researchers envision underwater hotels where guests sleep surrounded by marine life. In Europe, marine biologists study aquahabitats, pressurized labs where scientists can live for weeks beneath the waves. And in the United States, projects inspired by Sea Lab and Aquarius are reviving the dream of self-sustaining ocean colonies. To live underwater is to return, in a way, to our origins. For life itself began here, in the deep, dark cradle of the sea. Every new dive reveals something extraordinary. New species that glow with living light. Gigantic jellyfish that drift like ghosts. Crabs that live beside boiling vents, feeding on bacteria instead of sunlight. The ocean floor is a living library, a chronicle of evolution written in coral and sediment. Each discovery reshapes our view of what life can be. If life can thrive in the freezing, crushing darkness of the abyss, then perhaps it can exist beyond Earth, on icy moons like Europa or Enceladus. Thus, the ocean below becomes a mirror for the cosmos above. By exploring one, we prepare to understand the other. A new generation of explorers is rising, not soldiers, not industrialists, but dreamers and scientists. They carry digital sonar maps instead of compasses, remote-operated vehicles instead of cannons. Their mission, to explore with respect, to understand without harm. From marine ecologists charting coral forests, to engineers designing AI-guided submarines that can think and adapt. The heirs of the deep inherit both the wisdom and the warnings of those who came before. They know what war once did to these waters. They know the cost of arrogance, the fragility of balance. Their vision is not of dominance, but of harmony. As technology extends our reach, it also challenges our humanity. What will it mean when we can live, work, and dream beneath the waves? When machines can explore where no diver can survive? In these questions lies the essence of progress. Not in what we build, but in why we build it. The ocean, vast and unending, tests more than our machines. It tests our soul. It asks us whether we will use knowledge to conquer, or to coexist. The submarine, reborn for peace, becomes the symbol of that choice. Imagine a world where the hum of turbines is replaced by the song of whales, where underwater stations gather clean energy from tides and currents, where submarines glide silently, not to hunt, but to heal. In this vision of the future, humanity does not stand apart from the ocean, it becomes part of it again. Cities may rise beneath the waves, powered by light filtered through blue water. Children may grow up learning not only to swim, but to breathe in balance with the world that sustains them. This is not fantasy. It is possibility. The ocean has always been our greatest teacher. And if we listen closely, it will guide us toward a future not of isolation, but of unity. Even as we dream of exploration, the sea remains an enigma. Its depths still conceal secrets, lost ships, new species, ancient currents. It is the last true wilderness of Earth, and it humbles all who seek to master it. No matter how advanced our machines become, one truth will remain unchanged. The ocean does not belong to us. We are visitors here, brief, curious, and fragile. To explore is a privilege. To understand is a responsibility. To protect, that is the legacy we must leave. From the ashes of war rose the dream of exploration. From silence came the song of discovery. And from the depths, humanity has found both reflection and renewal. But what lies beyond even the deepest ocean, beyond water, beyond Earth itself? In the next chapter, we rise once more, from the sea to the stars, to see how the lessons of the deep have shaped humanity's vision of exploration among the heavens. For whether beneath the waves or among the stars, the journey is the same. To seek, to learn, to endure, and to remember. Every great journey begins with curiosity, the same force that drove sailors across the horizon, divers into the abyss, and astronauts beyond the sky. For centuries, the ocean was humanity's final frontier. Today, the cosmos has taken its place. And yet, in every star we reach, the ocean still follows. Because to explore space is to remember the sea. The language of the deep and the language of the stars are one and the same. Silence, pressure, darkness, and wonder. The submarine and the spacecraft share a soul. Both sealed worlds of fragile air. Both carrying life into the unlivable. Both symbols of humankind's defiance against the void. Long before rockets touched the heavens, the ocean taught us how to survive the unknown. Pressure hulls, navigation systems, life support technology, all were born beneath the waves. The first astronauts trained underwater, floating weightless among bubbles and coral, learning how to move without gravity, how to think in 3 dimensions, how to breathe inside a capsule smaller than a room, just as submariners had done for decades. In the silence of the deep, they practiced for the silence of the stars. The ocean became Earth's rehearsal for infinity. Every spacecraft is, in essence, a submarine, a pressurized vessel shielding life from a hostile environment. The engineers who built Apollo's command modules studied submarine systems, oxygen recycling, co-scrubbing, emergency power loops. When astronauts drift through the void, they live inside machines that evolved from the submarines of war. From the USS Nautilus to Skylab, from nuclear reactors to life support pods. The lineage is clay. The lessons learned in the dark oceans of Earth made possible the survival of humans in the dark ocean of space. In both the deep sea and deep space, the laws are merciless. One wrong calculation, and there is no second chance. The pressures, though opposite, are absolute. In the sea, the crushing weight of water. In space, the infinite weight of nothing. Yet humanity persists. We endure in steel and silence. We invent meaning inside emptiness. And in both realms, the explorers share a single truth. They are never truly alone. For when they descend or ascend, they carry with them the hopes of every soul who ever looked into the unknown and asked, what if? When we imagine alien life, we often imagine the ocean, because life itself began there. In hydrothermal vents beneath Earth's waves, scientists found microbes that thrive without sunlight, living on heat, pressure, and minerals. That discovery changed everything. If life can exist there, then it might exist anywhere. Beneath the icy crust of Jupiter's moon Europa, beneath the surface of Saturn's Enceladus, astronomers now believe vast oceans may flow. Dark, ancient seas warmed by internal heat. In those hidden waters, perhaps, swim the first alien forms humanity will ever meet. Thus, the ocean becomes not only our teacher, but our prophecy. The tools of ocean science have become the tools of interplanetary exploration. Submersible sonar inspired space-based radar. Deep-sea mapping became the foundation of Martian topography. Autonomous underwater drones evolved into planetary rovers. And now, a new generation of machines. Hybrid explorers that can dive and fly. Prepare to explore oceans beyond Earth. NASA's Europa Clipper, set to orbit the Jovian moon, will search for plumes that rise from its hidden sea, while robotic submarines, designed to withstand alien pressures, wait for the day they will dive into an extraterrestrial abyss. The same courage that once drove sailors beyond sight of land now propels us beyond the light of the sun. Yet amid all the technology, the satellites, the robots, the engines, one thing remains unchanged: the human heart. It is not the machine that dreams of the unknown. It is the mind within it. From the submariner staring through a periscope to the astronaut gazing through a viewport, both see the same thing: a horizon that never ends. And in that moment, they understand. Exploration is not a conquest of territory, but a conversation with the universe. From orbit, Earth looks like a shimmering ocean suspended in black, blue, alive, and delicate. Astronauts often say the first thing they notice is not the stars, but the water, the thin curve of the atmosphere glowing like a pearl, the deep blue that hides everything we have ever known. To look upon Earth from space is to see the ocean everywhere, a reminder that our planet itself is a living ship, a submarine adrift in cosmic darkness, carrying all life within its fragile hull. We are all crew members aboard the same vessel. The explorers of tomorrow will not distinguish between ocean and space. They will study both. The depths of the Mariana Trench and the craters of the Moon. The currents of the sea and the storms of Jupiter. For they will understand that the universe is a continuum, a vast sea, where the stars are islands and the planets are shores. Some will live beneath the sea, others among the stars. But their purpose will be one: to keep the flame of discovery alive. The story that began beneath the waves now stretches across galaxies. The submarine gave birth to the spaceship. The sailor became the astronaut, and the sea became the sky. Yet the journey never truly ends. For every frontier conquered only reveals another beyond it. The ocean taught us courage. Space teaches us humility. Together, they teach us eternity. Beneath the sea, beyond the stars, we search not for new worlds, but for a deeper understanding of our own. We are explorers, born of water, reaching for the heavens, forever listening for the echoes between them. The deep and the infinite are one story, and it is ours. When the Second World War ended, the oceans did not rest. They became the quietest and most contested borders of the 20th century. Both superpowers, United States and Soviet Union, recognized that the sea, vast and concealing, could hide weapons powerful enough to decide civilization's fate. By 1946, American research programs at Electric Boat, naval reactors, and Mare Island had begun converting wartime experience into long-range surveillance and attack doctrine. Soviet naval bureaus, drawing on captured German designs, initiated their own diesel-electric classes, the Whiskey and Zulu types, intended to challenge Western control of the Atlantic approaches. Submarine warfare evolved from tactical ambush to strategic deterrence. Torpedoes acquired acoustic homing. Sonar matured from crude echo sets to variable depth and towed arrays. And the atomic engine, first realized in the American USS Nautilus, SSN 571, 1954, erased the constraints of air and distance. A nuclear-powered vessel could remain submerged for months, limited only by crew endurance. The Soviet reply, the November class, 1958, employed pressurized water reactors of its own design. It was noisier and less reliable than its American counterpart, but confirmed the two-ocean world had entered the nuclear propulsion era. Throughout the 1950s, U.S. diesel boats of the Guppy series patrolled the Baltic and Barents Seas, photographing naval movements and recording sonar signatures. Soviet flotillas operated close to Iceland and the Norwegian Sea, testing NATO's northern barriers. Encounters were frequent but rarely acknowledged. Reports spoke of periscopes glimpsed at dawn, or sonar pings abruptly silenced. Each incident strengthened the perception that the next war, if it came, would begin invisibly. By the early 1960s, the United States had commissioned the Skipjack, Thresher, and Permit classes, streamlined hulls designed for high speed and deep diving. Their Soviet opposites, the Victor and Echo classes, combined torpedo and cruise missile capability. Anti-submarine warfare became a science of patience, track, classify, and hold contact without betraying one's own position. The Thresher disaster of 1963, resulting from a cascade of mechanical and procedural failures during deep trials, demonstrated the unforgiving environment these vessels inhabited. The loss of Scorpion in 1968 further impressed upon both navies the necessity of redundant systems and disciplined engineering. Between 1960 and 1985, dozens of collisions occurred, many undisclosed for decades. In 1974, the USS Gato scraped the hull of a Soviet Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine near the Kola Peninsula. Neither side fired, and both withdrew in silence. Similar episodes were recorded in the Sea of Okhotsk, the Norwegian Sea, and beneath the polar ice cap, each a reminder of how narrowly escalation was avoided. The sinking of Soviet K-129, 1968, during a clandestine patrol in the Pacific remains one of the Cold War's enduring mysteries. The U.S. recovery attempt, Project Azorian, retrieved fragments and cryptologic material from over 5 kilometers of depth, illustrating both the ambition and secrecy of the era. To maintain awareness of this hidden war, the United States deployed the Sound Surveillance System, SOSUS, a network of seabed hydrophones stretching across the Atlantic and Pacific. By measuring low-frequency noise, SOSUS could detect and track submarines thousands of kilometers away. Soviet countermeasures included quieting programs, anechoic coatings, and deceptive maneuvers through high-noise regions such as the Greenland-Iceland U.K. Goliath gap. The analysis of acoustic signatures became a specialized intelligence discipline. Every propeller, pump, and turbine produced a unique spectral pattern, its Warship. Analysts at naval facilities from Keflavik to Guam learned to identify classes and even individual hulls by sound alone. The polar basin became a principal theater of under-ice operations. Nuclear boats exploited the stable thermal layers and the masking effect of moving ice. American Sturgeon and later Los Angeles classes shadowed Soviet Typhoon ballistic missile submarines, often within kilometers, relying on passive sonar and meticulous navigation. Each sought positional advantage without acoustic compromise. Engagement rules were implicit, detection equaled failure. By the 1970s, both blocks maintained continuous at-sea deterrent patrols. U.S. Polaris, Poseidon, and Trident SSBNs operated from Holy Loch, Rota, and the Pacific. Soviet Delta and Typhoon classes patrolled the Arctic bastions near Murmansk and Petropavlovsk. The doctrine of mutual assured destruction depended on these submarines' invisibility. As long as each side could retaliate after a first strike, large-scale war was deterred. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, 4 Soviet Foxtrot-class submarines, B-4, B-36, B-59, and B-130, were tracked by U.S. destroyers enforcing quarantine. Deprived of communication and under depth-charge harassment, one commander prepared a nuclear-armed torpedo for firing. The decision was prevented only by the senior officer aboard, Captain Vasily Arkhipov, whose restraint averted nuclear exchange. Subsequent decades witnessed further alarms: sonar contacts misinterpreted as launches, navigation errors near foreign coasts, and reactor accidents hidden from public knowledge. Each revealed how easily human fatigue and incomplete information could have triggered catastrophe. By the late 1980s, the technology matured. Quieter propulsion, digital fire control, and satellite-link navigation reduced the uncertainty that had characterized earlier patrols. The 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union ended the global bipolar standoff, but left an enduring professional respect among former adversaries. Modern submarine fleets, American Virginia, British Astute, Russian Bory, derived directly from lessons learned in those shadow decades. International agreements on incident prevention and submarine rescue, adopted in the 1990s, institutionalized practices born from tragedy. The hidden war of the deep never erupted into open battle, yet it defined half a century of naval evolution. Beneath the waves, strategy became a matter of silence, precision, and endurance. The men who served in those steel corridors carried weapons they prayed never to use, maintaining a fragile peace by remaining unseen. Their vigilance preserved the safest calm that the world mistook for peace. In truth, the Cold War's quietest arena was its most perilous, the dark equilibrium sustained by submarines moving through a realm without borders, without sunlight, and without error. By the mid-1980s, the long submarine confrontation between East and West had settled into routine. The deterrent patrols continued, but the frequency of direct incidents had declined. Both navies, through experience and unspoken caution, had learned the limits of silent brinkmanship. In the United States Navy, the Los Angeles-class boats formed the operational core of the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. Each carried advanced sonar arrays, digital fire control systems, and Tomahawk cruise missiles. Maintenance schedules were predictable, morale stable, and crew rotation well organized. Across the Arctic, the Soviet Navy maintained an equally formidable presence. Its Victor, Charlie, and Delta classes conducted constant patrols from Murmansk, Gremika, and Petropavlovsk. Yet age and economic strain had begun to show. Machinery was overworked, refits were delayed, reactor insulation deteriorated under the pressures of continuous deployment. Still, the men sailed. Discipline remained absolute. Each patrol followed the same unyielding rhythm: battle stations, sonar tracking, hydroacoustic silence, then weeks of suspended time. By 1986, Soviet shipyards faced shortages of precision parts and trained welders. Submarine reactors that had been designed for 15 years of service were operating beyond 20. Officers kept meticulous logs of temperature fluctuations and coolant leaks, fully aware that replacements might never arrive. In the West, the situation was inverse. Technology was advancing faster than budgets. The introduction of quieter propellers, improved reactors, and computer automation demanded constant retraining. The cost of maintaining technological superiority exceeded all wartime precedents. Both sides bore the same human cost, isolation. Crews spent up to 90 days submerged, their only measure of time being the change of watch and the monotony of drills. Psychologists later described this final Cold War generation of submariners as the most disciplined and the most fatigued in naval history. On the 3rd of October, 1986, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-2-19 suffered a catastrophic explosion in one of its missile tubes while patrolling east of Bermuda. Seawater had leaked into the missile compartment, contacting liquid fuel and oxidizer. The detonation killed 4 crewmen instantly and ignited a fire that spread through the hull. Despite rising carbon monoxide and radiation levels, damage control parties contained the blaze long enough to shut down the reactors. The crew abandoned ship. The submarine sank 4 days later in nearly 5,000 meters of water. The commanding officer, Captain Igor Britanov, was later relieved and investigated but eventually cleared of wrongdoing. K-219's loss demonstrated the cumulative risks of aging systems operating at the limits of endurance. The next major incident occurred on the 7th of April, 1989. The Komsomolets, K-278, one of the Soviet Navy's most advanced attack submarines, was conducting deep-water tests in the Norwegian Sea when a fire broke out in the aft compartment. Designed to dive beyond 1,000 meters with a titanium hull, she represented the pinnacle of Soviet engineering. Yet human and mechanical vulnerabilities remained unchanged. As flames spread through cable trunks, power failed in several sections. The submarine surfaced but could not maintain buoyancy. Of the 6 to 9 crewmen aboard, 4 to 2 perished from smoke inhalation, exposure, or drowning before rescue ships arrived. The event shocked both East and West. It revealed that even the most sophisticated vessel could not escape the unforgiving laws of physics and the ocean. Following Komsomolets, Soviet naval morale declined sharply. Funding shortfalls affected every base. Wages were delayed for months. Spare parts were scavenged from decommissioned hulls. Nevertheless, patrols continued, sustained largely by professionalism and pride. Families at home faced shortages of food and heating fuel. In the United States, the drawdown of defense spending after the Reagan buildup began to reshape fleet priorities. New construction slowed, but operational tempo remained high. Submariners noted that although they were better supplied, the sense of vigilance was fading. The Cold War's constant alert posture was beginning to dissolve into uncertainty. Between 1990 and 1991, both sides curtailed deployments. The U.S. Navy shifted from global containment to regional readiness. Several older permit and sturgeon boats were retired early. The Soviet Navy canceled extended patrols beyond home waters to conserve reactor life and fuel. At the same time, joint communications protocols, incidents at sea agreements, were refined to prevent misinterpretation of maneuvers. The number of close contacts declined to the lowest level in 3 decades. Silence, once a weapon, became a sign of reconciliation. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991 ended the geopolitical structure that had sustained its navy. Submarine bases suddenly belonged to newly independent states. Budgets vanished. Fuel rationing grounded many boats permanently. Officers and enlisted men faced the choice of serving under new flags or leaving service altogether. In Murmansk and Severodvinsk, half-completed hulls rusted in dry dock. Some crews, unpaid for months, continued to maintain reactors to prevent accidents. American observers visiting under the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program reported extraordinary professionalism amid economic collapse. The United States Navy, now without an adversary of comparable scale, began to decommission large portions of its own fleet. The iron tide of submarine confrontation receded, leaving behind the residue of technology, experience, and mutual respect. In the years following the Soviet collapse, memorials appeared along northern coastlines, granite plaques in Murmansk, bronze statues in Severomorsk, and simple wooden crosses on the Kola Peninsula marking lost crews. Western navies likewise commemorated their own fallen in Groton, Connecticut, and Farslane, Scotland. Joint exercises for submarine rescue and environmental monitoring began under multinational agreements. Officers who once stalked each other beneath the polar ice met as colleagues at maritime conferences. The long confrontation had ended not through victory or defeat, but through exhaustion and understanding. The fall of the Iron Tide marked the end of the most extensive undersea standoff in history. For nearly half a century, submariners from opposing nations had maintained a fragile peace by their constant presence. They had lived without sunlight, spoken rarely of their missions, and carried weapons capable of ending civilization, yet they prevented their use through discipline and restraint. When the Cold War ended, the oceans grew quieter. What remained was a legacy of endurance and professionalism, and a generation of sailors who had witnessed both the extremes of technology and the limits of human endurance. Their silent watch preserved the balance of the 20th century, and their experience became the foundation for a more cooperative era beneath the waves. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the world's naval balance shifted overnight. The once monolithic Red Banner fleet splintered into the navies of Russia, Ukraine, and several newly independent states. Shipyards stood idle, and many of the world's most advanced submarines were left unfinished in frozen docks along the White Sea. The United States Navy, suddenly without a peer adversary, reassessed its purpose. The strategic deterrent remained vital, but global conflict had receded. Washington redirected resources from nuclear standoff to regional projection and humanitarian operations. The U.S. fleet retained its Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, but attack boats, particularly the Los Angeles and improved Los Angeles classes, were increasingly used for intelligence collection, cruise missile strikes, and special operations. At the same time, defense analysts across NATO studied the implications of a world without the bipolar standoff. The oceans were still vast, but they were now open to new forms of cooperation and new risks. In 1992, the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program was signed, creating a framework for dismantling redundant nuclear weapons and ensuring the safe deactivation of warheads aboard decommissioned Soviet submarines. American specialists traveled to Murmansk, Severodvinsk, and Archangels to inspect storage facilities, reactor compartments, and defueling procedures. What they found was a paradox: extraordinary professionalism, surviving amid total economic collapse. The collaboration led to the safe elimination of over 100 submarine reactors between 1993 and 2001. For the first time in modern history, former adversaries were working side by side to secure the very technologies that had once threatened mutual destruction. The steel of the Cold War was being melted down under a shared mandate: prevention rather than confrontation. By the mid-1990s, the major naval powers had adopted new doctrines reflecting multipurpose missions and asymmetric threats. The United States Navy emphasized stealth, precision strike, and intelligence. The Seawolf-class submarines, USS Seawolf, USS Connecticut, and USS Jimmy Carter, were conceived as silent hunters capable of tracking any vessel in existence. Each was equipped with advanced quieting, high-strength steel hulls, and the most sensitive sonar ever deployed. The Russian Navy, though diminished, sought to maintain parity through innovation rather than quantity. The Akula II and Oscar I classes remained potent, and design bureaus began conceptualizing a new generation: the Bori ballistic missile submarine and the Yasen multipurpose attack submarine. Western Europe pursued modernization through cooperation. Britain's Astute class, France's Triumphant class, and Germany's Type 212 introduced air-independent propulsion and modular systems, heralding a global trend toward efficiency and sustainability. This was not an arms race in the old sense. It was a race for endurance, silence, and precision. The oceans, once divided by ideology, were now laboratories of innovation. As the digital revolution transformed every field, the submarine force adapted in parallel. Computerized navigation, fiber optic sensor grids, and satellite communication links allowed instantaneous data exchange between submerged vessels and national command centers. American Virginia-class submarines, whose development began in the late 1990s, exemplified this change. They were designed from inception as multi-mission platforms, capable of launching Tomahawk missiles, deploying unmanned undersea vehicles, supporting SEAL teams, and conducting electronic surveillance, all in one hull. This integration of cybernetics, automation, and real-time intelligence marked the transition from the industrial to the digital age of submarine warfare. The measure of superiority was no longer only depth or speed, but information. In the 1990s, new players entered the undersea domain. Japan, South Korea, India, and Australia invested in indigenous submarine programs, often incorporating Western or Russian technologies. India's Sindhish, Kilo-class, fleet, later followed by the Arahant nuclear submarine project, demonstrated Asia's growing strategic reach. Meanwhile, The People's Republic of China accelerated the development of its Type 093 and Type 094 nuclear submarines, integrating lessons from decades of observation and Western reverse engineering. The undersea frontier was no longer dominated by two superpowers. It had become multipolar. Strategists began referring to the new era as the quiet race, a global competition waged not through numbers of hulls, but through acoustics, propulsion, and intelligence networks. On the 12th of August, 2000, during a Northern Fleet exercise in the Barents Sea, the Russian submarine Kursk, K-141, suffered a series of explosions in its forward torpedo compartment and sank with all 118 men aboard. International attention was immediate. NATO submarines, Western governments, and private salvage firms offered assistance within hours. For the first time, the Russian Navy, heir to the Soviet tradition of secrecy, was forced to coordinate openly with former adversaries. Though the rescue attempt failed, the event marked a turning point. The subsequent investigation, aided by Norwegian and British experts, led to the modernization of Russian submarine safety protocols and accelerated the development of multinational rescue systems, such as the NATO Submarine Rescue System, NSS, and Russia's pre-ice deep submergence program. Tragedy had become the catalyst for transparency. The early 2000s witnessed unprecedented international partnerships beneath the sea. Joint rescue drills were conducted off Scotland, Norway, and the Pacific, involving the exchange of deep-diving vehicles, pressure chamber facilities, and medical teams. NATO and Russia established communication standards to ensure immediate response to any submarine in distress, regardless of nationality. In 2005, this cooperation was put to the test when a Russian minisubmarine, AS-28 Prize, became entangled in fishing nets off Kamchatka. British and American remotely operated vehicles were flown in and successfully freed the trapped craft within 3 days. The rescue validated a decade of planning and symbolized a new global ethic, that survival at sea transcended borders. The final years of the first post-Cold War decade were characterized by quiet breakthroughs. Acoustic stealth reached levels once considered impossible. New composite propulsors reduced cavitation noise to near-ambient levels. Advances in nuclear propulsion extended reactor lifetimes beyond 30 years. Lithium-ion battery systems promised unprecedented underwater endurance for conventional submarines. At the same time, unmanned undersea vehicles, UUVs, emerged as a new strategic dimension. The U.S. Navy's large displacement UUV program and similar Russian and Chinese projects began to redefine undersea dominance, not through the presence of men, but through networks of autonomous machines. The sea was no longer merely a frontier of deterrence. It had become the hidden infrastructure of the information age. By the dawn of the 21st century, the legacy of the Cold War had transformed from confrontation to cooperation. The submariners who once stared at each other across the sonar abyss now trained together in search and rescue, environmental monitoring, and scientific expeditions. The knowledge accumulated through decades of rivalry became the foundation for shared technological progress. The ocean, once the stage of secrecy, had become a bridge of mutual necessity. Naval historians refer to this transition as the quiet peace. It was not signed in a conference hall, but built through thousands of coordinated dives, shared data links, and silent acts of professional respect. By 2010, the undersea world had entered its most complex era yet. Nuclear deterrence persisted, but it now coexisted with global cooperation, digital surveillance, and rapid technological evolution. The submarine, once the solitary instrument of total war, had become a node in a vast and interconnected system. The men and women who served aboard these machines carried forward the ethos forged in the Cold War: vigilance, silence, and endurance. Yet their mission had changed, from preventing apocalypse to preserving stability in an increasingly crowded and contested sea. The rivalry that had once defined the ocean had evolved into stewardship. The century below had begun. 2 decades after the Cold War's end, the great submarine bases of the 20th century had grown silent. Piers once crowded with steel hulls now rusted under Arctic snow. At Severodvinsk, Vladivostok, and Balaclava, decommissioned boats rested in shallow water, their paint peeling, their numbers fading. These were the ghosts of steel, vessels that once carried nuclear arsenals and the weight of global deterrence. They were relics of a vanished struggle, but they could not simply be forgotten. Each contained radioactive reactors, hazardous materials, and histories too dangerous to ignore. The Russian Federation inherited more than 200 retired nuclear submarines. Many lay partially dismantled in shipyards, awaiting reactor removal and hull cutting. The process was slow, expensive, and technically perilous. By 2010, international funding from the Global Partnership Program, led by the G8 nations, supported the safe decommissioning of these leviathans. The task was as much environmental as strategic, preventing contamination of the Arctic seas that had once been battlefields of silence. From the fjords of Norway to the Pacific harbors of Kamchatka, photographers and historians began cataloging these decaying fleets. The once feared Typhoon-class giants, the largest submarines ever built, were now skeletal forms behind barbed wire, their massive missile tubes welded shut. Of the 6 constructed, only one, Dmitry Donskoy, remained afloat for training. The rest were scrapped or awaiting dismantlement. In the United States, too, the nuclear armada was thinning. The Sturgeon and Ailey Los Angeles-class submarines were defueled and stored at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington state. Each was sliced into sections, the reactor compartment sealed, floated by barge to a designated burial site along the Columbia River Plateau. There they would rest for centuries, monitored but innate, monuments to an age of vigilance. Western Europe followed similar paths. Britain's Resolution-class deterrent boats and France's Redoutable were preserved as museum exhibits, their internal compartments converted into public galleries. Visitors could walk through missile silos that once held the instruments of apocalypse, now empty chambers echoing with school tours and guided commentaries. By the early 2010s, environmental scientists warned that the long-term hazards of abandoned reactors and chemical stores could outlast political memories. The Barents and Kara seas contained several scuttled submarines and reactors intentionally sunk during the Soviet era to avoid accidents on land. These included the K-27, resting on the seabed since 1981 with 2 active reactors sealed within its hull. International initiatives sought to survey and stabilize these underwater time bombs. Joint Russian-Norwegian expeditions used robotic submersibles to assess radiation leakage. The results were mixed. While most wrecks remained intact, corrosion posed an inevitable threat. For coastal communities that had once lived in the shadow of naval secrecy, the cleanup operations symbolized both closure and responsibility. The Cold War's environmental debt was vast, and it would be paid not in politics, but in patience. As the physical remnants decayed, the human need to remember grew stronger. In Murmansk, a granite memorial bearing the silhouettes of submarines was erected overlooking the Kola Bay, dedicated to those who never surfaced. Each engraved name represented not only a lost vessel but a fragment of a generation's sacrifice. In the United States, naval museums expanded to include exhibits on Cold War deterrence, emphasizing the psychological endurance of submarine crews. The USS Nautilus, preserved in Groton, Connecticut, became a pilgrimage site for former sailors from both sides of the Iron Curtain. At Holy Loch in Scotland, once a key American submarine tender base, a modest plaque was installed in 2015, its inscription simple: "To those who stood watch beneath the sea, in peace and in silence." Across the world, nations that had once measured each other by sonar range now shared ceremonies of remembrance. The oceans that had divided them became a common grave and a shared heritage. Even as memorials rose, the great shipyards that had built the Cold War fleets faced uncertain futures. Severodvinsk, once the beating heart of Soviet submarine construction, shifted toward commercial shipbuilding but remained haunted by its past. Visitors could still see the rusted gantries that had launched the Typhoons. Within its dry docks, the hulks of incomplete nuclear boats, designated Project 941U, stood frozen in time, never to be completed. Gdansk, Cherbourg, and Barrow-in-Furness diversified into civilian vessels and offshore technology. Yet the industrial ghosts persisted. Vast assembly halls designed for weapons now echoed with wind turbine blades and research craft. Economically, the conversion of these facilities reflected a global shift, from military competition to resource management, from secrecy to sustainability. Politically, it symbolized reconciliation, not the erasure of history, but its adaptation. With technology and robotics advancing, the world's navies and private companies turned their gaze downward, not for war, but for exploration and recovery. Deep-sea salvage became a new frontier. Governments funded missions to locate and document lost submarines from both World Wars and the Cold War. These expeditions were acts of archaeology and remembrance rather than intelligence gathering. In 2017, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis was discovered at a depth of 18,000 feet in the Philippine Sea, followed soon by the USS Lexington and USS Hornet. Meanwhile, Russian researchers identified Cold War wrecks near the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. Each discovery reignited public fascination with the undersea domain and raised questions about how to balance exploration with respect. The era of silent patrols had ended. The era of historical recovery had begun. As the second decade of the 21st century drew to a close, most of the world's Cold War submarines had been either dismantled, memorialized, or left to rest undisturbed beneath the sea. Yet their legacy endured in the ships that followed. Modern submarines, the Bory, Yasen, Astute, and Virginia classes, were the heirs of this lineage, incorporating lessons paid for in steel, sweat, and silence. They were built cleaner, safer, and more adaptable, but their purpose had evolved. Deterrence now shared space with disaster response, oceanographic research, and environmental monitoring. The ghosts of steel had not vanished, they had transformed. The same shipyards that once forged weapons of annihilation now produced vessels that mapped coral reefs and repaired undersea cables. Humanity's relationship with the deep had come full circle, from conquest to defense to preservation. In every Navy's tradition, a silent moment is observed for those still on patrol, a phrase honoring submariners lost at sea. By 2020, that moment carried a universal meaning. From Russia's Kola Peninsula to America's Pacific bases, the same bell tolled in memory of men whose missions had never been acknowledged in life, but whose endurance preserved peace. The forgotten fleets were not truly forgotten. They had become part of the ocean's history, rusting, enduring, teaching. Their steel shells remained as testimony to an age when the fate of nations hung on decisions made in the dark, hundreds of meters below the surface. And in that darkness, even as the world above changed beyond recognition, the code of the submariner endured. By the close of the 2010s, the story of the undersea age had turned from tension to reflection. What had begun as an arms race concluded as a shared commitment to remembrance and stewardship. The Cold War's fleets no longer patrolled, but their legacy shaped every new hull, every international agreement, every act of maritime cooperation. They were the foundation on which a safer, more responsible undersea world was built. Steel corrodes, nations change, but memory endures, anchored deep beneath the waves, in the quiet where history sleeps. By the start of the 2020s, the calm that had followed the Cold War's end was fading. The world's oceans, once arenas of cooperation, again became theaters of silent competition. Great power rivalry had returned, not in open battle, but in the invisible realm below the waves. The United States, Russia, and China all modernized their undersea forces at an unprecedented pace. Each viewed the depths not merely as military territory but as the foundation of economic and digital infrastructure. The cables that carried global data, the pipelines that supplied energy, and the resources hidden beneath the seabed. The new frontier of conflict was not defined by borders, but by bandwidth, sonar, and stealth. The early 2020s marked the integration of cyberspace and seapower. Submarines, once instruments of torpedoes and missiles, became tools of information dominance. Modern vessels such as the U.S. Virginia Block V, Britain's Astute, France's Barracuda, and Russia's Yasen were fitted with extensive sensor arrays and fiber optic masts that could map, monitor, and, if ordered, manipulate digital flows along the ocean floor. The protection of undersea cables, through which more than 95% of global internet traffic passes, emerged as a new mission priority. Navies deployed patrol routes along key choke points, the North Atlantic Ridge, the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf. For the first time, Strategic Command understood that the integrity of the world's data lines was as critical as deterrence itself. By 2021, analysts described a triangular balance of undersea power. The United States and its allies emphasized transparency and networked operations. NATO's dynamic Mongoose and Cutlass Fury exercises refined multinational anti-submarine tactics, combining sonar aircraft, surface escorts, and digital coordination. The Russian Federation, though smaller in numbers, maintained qualitative strength. The Bory ballistic missile submarines formed the core of its nuclear deterrent, while Yasen attack boats demonstrated global reach, from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. The People's Republic of China expanded rapidly. Its Type 094A and Type 095 classes entered service alongside new deep-sea sensor networks in the South China Sea, part military, part scientific, but always strategic. The underwater environment had once again become a chessboard, one played in darkness, silence, and secrecy. Climate change opened a new theater, the Arctic. Retreating ice exposed shipping lanes and untapped reserves of oil and gas. Submarines, long adapted to polar patrols, were now tasked with mapping and monitoring regions once impassable. Russia fortified its northern bases, Murmansk, Severomorsk, and Franz Joseph Land, turning the Arctic into both laboratory and fortress. The U.S. Navy and Allied forces reactivated under-ice operations, re-establishing skills last used during the Cold War. For scientists, the melting ice offered opportunity. For strategists, vulnerability. Whoever mastered the Arctic depths would control the shortest maritime route between Europe and Asia. While the Arctic drew attention, the Pacific became the most active undersea theater. In the South China Sea, Chinese submarines patrolled from newly constructed island bases, challenging international navigation norms. U.S., Japanese, Australian, and Indian submarines increased presence in response, forming a quiet deterrent network under the framework of the Quad. In 2021, the announcement of AUKUS, a trilateral defense pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, signaled a strategic realignment. Its cornerstone was the transfer of nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia, marking the first such collaboration in decades. The project promised silent endurance and regional balance, but it also underscored the new intensity of maritime rivalry. Across the Indo-Pacific, the sonar silence of the Cold War had returned, punctuated by occasional glimpses, periscopes, satellite trails, diplomatic notes. Parallel to state fleets, a new class of undersea craft was emerging, unmanned, autonomous, and networked. By 2022, the United States deployed the Orca Extra-Large Unmanned Undersea Vehicle, XLUUV, capable of months-long missions without a crew. Russia's Poseidon system, an autonomous, nuclear-powered undersea drone, entered testing, designed to act as a strategic deterrent. China, the United Kingdom, and Japan developed their own families of deep-running unmanned vehicles for surveillance and mapping. These machines blurred the line between weapon and sensor, between exploration and deterrence. They represented the future of naval competition, intelligence through autonomy. In 2022 to 2024, several incidents highlighted the new opacity of the underwater world. Mysterious damage to subsea pipelines in the Baltic Sea prompted international investigations into sabotage. Similar concerns arose around communication cables near Guam and the Mediterranean. Although evidence remained incomplete, the events underscored a fundamental truth. The seabed had become a contested domain. Specialized vessels, nominally for research or rescue, now carried arrays of manipulators, drones, and sensors. Their missions blended science, surveillance, and occasionally, suspicion. The frontier of espionage had moved to the ocean floor. Ironically, even as operations became more secret, technology made the oceans more transparent. Commercial satellites could detect periscope wakes. Oceanographic buoys recorded acoustic anomalies. Artificial intelligence began to analyze vast sonar datasets, identifying submarine signatures once thought undetectable. The invisible frontier was becoming partially visible, and navies adapted by designing vessels whose acoustic profiles changed dynamically, mimicking natural sounds or erasing themselves in noise. Silence, once passive, became an active form of deception. By 2024, calls emerged for a modern law of the deep, a framework governing undersea infrastructure, data security, and environmental preservation. International forums debated transparency and submarine rescue cooperation and protection of seabed resources. Though progress was slow, the dialogue itself represented continuity. The same professional respect that had survived the Cold War now tempered 21st-century rivalry. For the men and women saving beneath the sea, missions remained secret, but their purpose had broadened, to safeguard not only nations, but the shared arteries of a connected planet. As of 2025, the global undersea order stands at a paradox. Submarines have never been quieter, more powerful, or more numerous. Yet the line between deterrence and competition grows thinner. The United States continues deploying advanced Virginia Block V units with hypersonic missile capability. Russia fields new Boreas boats, while China launches its next generation of strategic submarines from Hainan Island. Meanwhile, middle powers, from India to South Korea, expand their fleets, each seeking autonomy and influence. The invisible frontier, once a Cold War relic, is now the core of modern geopolitics. Beneath the calm surface of the 21st century sea, an intricate network of machines, sensors, and human watchstanders maintains the same vigil once held by their predecessors. Across decades, the submarine has remained constant in one respect: its silence. From the diesel patrols of the Second World War to the nuclear cathedrals of the Cold War and the autonomous craft of today, each generation of submariners has inherited a single mission: to operate unseen, to deter without destruction, to maintain peace through presence. In 2025, as technology stretches the limits of perception, the ancient discipline endures. The true frontier of the modern world is not the stars above, but the depths below, where nations meet, unseen, and history continues in the quiet pulse of sonar. By the middle of the 2020s, every major naval power recognized that control of the sea would no longer rest solely on the surface. The undersea world, once the exclusive preserve of stealth and strategy, was becoming a shared domain of energy, communication, and culture. From Arctic data cables to equatorial mining fields, the ocean floor had become both marketplace and potential battlefield. Governments and corporations alike invested in deep-sea infrastructure, while the world's navies prepared to protect it. The boundary between commerce and defense grew increasingly porous. By the early 2030s, humanity's economic presence beneath the waves had multiplied. Networks of energy pipelines and mineral extraction hubs dotted continental shelves. Autonomous maintenance drones traversed the seabed, linking installations through fiber optic arteries. In this world, submarines were no longer isolated weapons platforms. They became integral nodes in global management systems. Some served as mobile command centers, others as emergency guardians, ready to secure or disable subsea assets in moments of crisis. International agreements, drafted after years of debate in Geneva and Singapore, attempted to define zones of technological neutrality, areas where civilian operations were to remain free of military interference. Yet the same agreements left loopholes wide enough for strategy to pass through. The creation of the United Nations Seabed Authority Council in 2032 formalized a long-awaited framework for managing the global deep. It established protocols for resource sharing, environmental monitoring, and disaster response. Naval cooperation followed. Joint rescue operations and pollution control drills became annual exercises. Warships escorted research convoys. Survey submarines shared environmental data. The ocean floor, once the symbol of secret war, began to appear in international statistics and climate reports. Yet beneath the veneer of transparency, the major powers still competed, each seeking influence over newly mapped resource belts and sensor networks. By the mid-2030s, a new generation of strategic submarines appeared, quieter, deeper diving, and more interconnected with national command grids. The United States introduced its Columbia-class deterrent fleet. China launched the Type 098. Russia modernized its Boribee line. While the Cold War had relied on secrecy, the modern age relied on ambiguity. States conducted joint mapping expeditions even as they shadowed one another's patrol routes. Cooperation through competition became the defining paradox of the decade. The world's navies learned to coexist in proximity, rarely clashing, often surveilling, always prepared. As extraction deepened, so did ecological concern. Deep-sea mining, once heralded as a solution to resource scarcity, began to reveal unexpected consequences: disruption of microbial ecosystems, chemical plumes altering regional currents, and acoustic pollution interfering with marine life. The same navies that had pioneered oceanic dominance now found themselves enforcing environmental protection. Patrol submarines carried scientific sensors, recording the very data used to limit future exploitation. The idea of the guardian submarine emerged, vessels tasked with defense not against nations, but against negligence. This period marked a philosophical shift. The ocean was no longer only territory, it was heritage. The crisis of 2039, a near collision between rival survey flotillas off the Galapagos Ridge, triggered swift diplomacy. In 2040, 70 nations signed the Global Maritime Compact, establishing a permanent council for undersea arbitration. Its most radical clause recognized the seabed as a shared strategic environment, requiring notification for all submarine deployments within certain corridors. Though not every power complied, the gesture marked a new maturity in maritime relations. For the first time in recorded history, humanity began to treat the ocean floor as a community rather than a frontier. Amid automation and digital governance, the human factor endured. Submariners of the 2040s continued to face isolation, discipline, and the psychological strain of silence. Training academies in Norfolk, Vladivostok, Qingdao, and Mumbai emphasized mental resilience alongside technical mastery. Cultural exchanges, once unthinkable, became standard. Multinational crews participated in shared expeditions, and memorial ceremonies honored lost sailors of all nations. The submarine service, once defined by secrecy, had become a fraternity of experience. Experimental undersea habitats, descendants of the old Sea Lab and Shinkai projects, evolved into permanent research outposts. Supported by hybrid power from thermal vents and floating solar arrays, these deep-sea stations became symbols of cooperation. Naval logistics supported their construction. Submarine crews ferried personnel and supplies. For the first time, civilian and military objectives aligned. The ocean study was inseparable from its security. Some observers began to speak of a deep-sea civilization, a hybrid culture of scientists, engineers, and sailors living in symbiosis with the planet's final frontier. By 2045, the world had entered a new equilibrium. Submarines still patrolled, deterrence still existed, but open hostility had receded. The lessons of the 20th century had matured into restraint. Every major navy maintained transparent crisis communication links. When a seismic event struck the Pacific Ridge that year, multiple nations coordinated emergency responses within hours, deploying both military and civilian assets. It was a moment of unprecedented solidarity, proving that the ocean could unite as easily as it once divided. From the torpedo battles of 1942 to the silent standoffs of the 1980s and the cooperative patrols of 2045, the submarine story mirrors humanity's evolution, from rivalry to reason. The deep ocean remains what it has always been: silent, immense, impartial. Yet in that silence lies a record of human persistence, the will to explore, to defend, to coexist. As the mid-21st century unfolds, the submarine endures not as a weapon of fear, but as a vessel of memory and vigilance. Beneath the ever-changing surface of politics and technology, it continues its ancient duty: to watch, unseen, so that peace may remain unbroken.